Yo, what's good? Welcome to Observing the Process. Before we start, I'm hoping you can help me out by supporting the show. You can rate and review it on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you listen. You can share it with your friends, you can blog about it, or discuss it on your own podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, you can subscribe to my channel and like this video, or you can support it directly. You can do this by going to my website. I'll leave a link in the description. Thank you for supporting the show. Listeners like you make it possible. Today on the show, I had Ashleigh Parker. Ashleigh is a freelance consultant working in digital, film, and production. Ashleigh and I caught up on life in LA, working in the creative industry, what's going on with the evolution of social media, and more. Please give it up for Ashleigh Parker.
In the land of China, people hardly got nothing at all.
No possessions?
And in China, they never go to church.
No religion too?
Or do magic.
Well, it's easy if you try, Dick.
3, 2, 1. Okay, we're live. Ashleigh, how are you doing?
I'm great.
Yeah, thank you for having me over in your wonderful Los Angeles house. It was quite a mission to get here. The traffic in LA. Oh my God. I came from, where was Jonathan? Like Culver City, something like that?
Culver City, yep.
Yeah, it's like a little stressful driving around here. I don't know.
Yeah.
What do you think? It was a lot for me to deal with.
Right.
Yeah.
It's like it's like one of the things you get used to being asked about from Uber drivers or anyone visiting basically is like, how do you deal with the traffic? But I think, my answer to this is that you end up basing your life where you don't have to be a part of that. So like my job is near my house or my friends are near my house. Like it kind of where you live in the city basically changes your entire experience. So for example, I would never drive to Culver City unless I had to.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
That
but
does
it's
make
stressful
sense.
for sure. Like people drive like assholes and there's traffic always. So yeah.
I totally agree. I think it's interesting that just like you have to kind of create your own bubble in a sense of where you live. In Shanghai, it's so easy to just move like bilaterally around the city, like any direction. But LA is just so big, and I don't know. It was just like a lot to deal with going from in the rush hour and all that stuff. You just kind of have to plan your day out, maybe, or not commute as far. Or what was the commute like to where you were working before this? Or
Legitimately 10 minutes.
so you set it up. You set it up properly like that.
I used to commute to West Hollywood because I worked out the back of like an art bookstore originally.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So I worked at Imprint Projects, which was a creative agency. And originally our LA office was behind one of the owners has a independent art bookstore called Family Books, which is shout out. You should definitely check it out. Fairfax Avenue.
Wait, Family Books.
Yeah.
I think they followed me on Shanghai Observed, actually.
Yeah. I sent your profile to David and he already followed. So yeah,
okay.
he's definitely
sick.
his vibe.
Yeah, so that it was so cool because this really, really awesome skater, his name is Jerry Su. His name is Internet Famous on Instagram, like awesome username. And he was following them as well. So I'm like, oh, this must be a pretty hip bookstore.
It's just like an institution. So he was there before. It was traditionally like a very much a Jewish area, like Katz Deli that's there is super famous.
Yeah.
And it was like a lot of local Jewish businesses. But Family was like one of the first to move in. And now it's like this insane streetwear scene and people film hip hop videos. And it ended up being that craziness was like part of why we moved out of there and moved to Chinatown in LA. So that's 10 minutes from here. We're in Echo Park.
Awesome. Okay, before we get into all that, I have so many questions about the bookstore and all that shit. But you're from Australia. What's going on right now is pretty crazy. The wildfires. I don't know. Have you heard much about it? Has like friends and family been affected? It's just so in the news right now. I kind of wanted to talk about it a little bit.
Yeah. It's definitely, I've lived most of my adult life out away from Australia. So, but it's times like this that you really feel connected. And it's devastating, basically, is the short answer. It's like to lose our nature and animals and things like that. And it makes it really hard to be so far away because, it's tragic. And I think every article you read, I love how it starts with like, this is not something Australia is not used to. And even our Prime Minister talks about like, we're good at dealing with these kinds of disasters. And it doesn't make it any easier. Like, I'm glad that it's getting so much coverage because I think, it's important to talk about the weather change and climate change, especially, and how that's entwined with politics right now, I think is super relevant. So, but at the same time, there's a lot of disasters that happen in a ton of other places that
Sure.
don't get the coverage that we get. So,
Sure.
it's a long way of saying that I'm really sad about it. And I've definitely cried about it. And I think really the wildlife is the hardest thing to deal with, like the animals and how long it will take for that to regenerate and grow back.
Yeah, what I was surprised about was that, so my first impressions were like, it's tragic. The Australian government must be doing everything they possibly can to deal with it. And what I learned by listening to this podcast just today was that the Australian government is a little more hands-off than I realized. And it's actually turning into more of a political thing than I imagined. So to my understanding from listening today, the Australian government heavily relies on coal. It's a big part of, it creates 55,000 jobs for Australians all over the country. And, so is it the Prime Minister? Is that the name of your leader?
It's the Prime Minister.
Okay,
yeah.
you got a Prime Minister over there. So he...
Still democracy, but just a different name.
Okay.
Yeah.
So he is, and politics in general, have like taken a lot of donations from the coal industry in general. So a lot of people have been protesting and using this as an opportunity to kind of maybe attack the Prime Minister or put him in his place. And so that's something that I learned, that coal is a big part of the Australian dependent, like they're semi-dependent on it. And then it turned into, the government kind of having to take a stance. So that was just something I learned. I don't know if you knew of that or like what your thoughts are on that, but I was surprised to find that out.
Yeah. I mean, obviously with social being how it is, and we can talk about that later, like all I get fed is my very kind of liberal friends kind of posting and reposting how to help and how to change our government because we're going through the same kind of crisis of conservatives taking over and capitalism and all the same things as we experience here in America. I think what's most interesting is that Australia is a bit of a bubble, and I don't think that we thought we would be affected by what happened in America with Trump, but we definitely are, and we're in the pocket of America as is everyone else, especially when it comes to industry. So, a lot of our businesses have been sold off to Asia, and pretty much the industry and wealth that we have right now is around destroying our land. So it makes it tough, and I think that's why it's important that he's getting a lot of heat alongside.
Yeah, it was also terrible timing that he happened to be on a vacation in Hawaii as like the gnarliest part of it was going down or something. Or actually, I think 2 firefighters unfortunately passed away trying to help. And also like they don't rely on a paid firefighter system. It's a lot of volunteers out there. So then once that happened, they changed it. Now they're paying volunteer firefighters. It's just been a very interesting thing that's going on. But also what you mentioned about selling off to Asian businesses. I heard something in the news that an Asian, it might have been just China in general, was attempting to buy 3% of the Australian landmass, just like a percentage of the property of all of Australia. So I thought that was pretty crazy that kind of thing is even going on right now. Did you hear about that?
I mean, I've been across our economic industry like as much as someone who works in creative agency and cultural landscapes. That's a terrible thing to say. I feel like edit that out, but like, no, obviously don't. But I definitely think that's part of the problem is that and even now, like we're focused very much on climate change, but I do think we need to find how to create different industries within Australia to really change something. And I understand, and this is not to be taken the wrong way. I understand, a more conservative perspective of a lot of people's jobs gets lost, the economy gets brutalized, but we have to find something to reverse it, and it has to be quick. And I think that is the challenge more so than just, recycling, basically.
Totally.
We have to change the economy. And
I would love to
yeah.
have the answers, and I just think
Yeah.
neither of us do. It's such
No.
a hard thing to tackle. So
Right.
maybe more positive notes. You're from Australia. Tell me about the good stuff that's going on when you maybe were growing up. Where are you from in Australia?
I'm from a small beach town called Noosa Heads.
Okay.
It's a couple of hours north of Brisbane. So
Oh yeah, we talked about this a little bit. You
Yeah.
got beautiful surf up there.
yeah, we used to have an international surf competition every year. Still do actually, the longboard competition. But
Noosa.
yeah, in terms of growing up in that bubble, I was definitely like in the biggest bubble of all. It was like a tourist town and really happy upbringing in a lot of nature. So surfing and waterfalls and like I relate it to Americans to like a mix of Hawaii and Santa Barbara. But yeah, it was a great place to grow up, and I'm really still thankful to have that upbringing.
Yeah. So for people who don't know, Brisbane is on the east coast of Australia, and it's like maybe the third or fourth biggest city in Australia, probably. Maybe the third. I would say Sydney, and then Melbourne, and then Brisbane. Something like that. Maybe Perth is up there as well. Those are like the four cities, right?
I think if you equate population and industry, like Brisbane has become the third at this
interesting.
point.
Yeah.
Sydney's definitely the lead front runner than Melbourne,
Mm.
and most people live in Sydney and Melbourne. But Brisbane is, just because it's better value for real estate and all those kinds of things, it's become more popular in the last decade.
Yeah, I think I told you I studied abroad in the Gold Coast for a semester, and I was in Broadbeach.
Yeah, because you surf, right?
Yeah, that was
It's
like
like the ultimate exchange.
It was 100% the reason why I chose, and got so lucky, met so many one really good friend that I stay in touch with today. So it was an amazing experience to be able to wake up on the beach and surf. I was like a 5-minute walk away from the beach. It was so beautiful. Do you miss that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I think a big draw. I didn't realize it because I don't know, to back up, like I couldn't wait to get out of there. Like I was like from an early age, surfing being the only thing that you're into, and everyone working in hospitality or construction was like, get me out of here as soon as possible. So I like left a couple of like 2 months after graduating. I was
Right.
moved to London. So, that's how I felt then. But now at 33, like I for sure miss it. And I think a big part of me moving to America and wanting to be in New York, but actually ending up in LA had to do with, access to the beach and mountains and things that felt close to home.
Yeah, I think almost everyone goes through that. Like everyone wants to get out of their hometown as quick as possible. Even if you're from Paradise, like a lot of people, it's just like there's a big thing in America. I feel like if you're from New York, you want to end up in LA. If you're from LA, you want to go to New York. It's just kind of wanting to get out of what you're so accustomed to and experience something different. It's always greener on the other side, I think, is what a lot of people feel.
Right. Yeah. I think for me, I still am torn in it a little bit. Like I love cities. I think culturally and what I ended up doing for work and the people I surround myself with, like I haven't found a small town with that at such mass. So,
Yeah.
purely just the amount of people and what people do in small towns. So I still struggle with it because I think there's a part of me that loves nature and quiet and all those things. But I think cities are still where I imagine myself in the future.
I think a big part of the problem for me is, we have so much access to seeing other people and the way they live. And, we're always comparing ourselves to the best part of someone else's day on social media, so that really affects me and not being happy enough with what I already have, because for me, I'm always like, I live in Shanghai and, you have good days and bad days. But at the end of the day, if it was a bad day, you're comparing yourself to the highlights of what someone else had on Instagram. And that is something that I'm trying to get over. Do you feel that you ever have that problem with social media, or do you feel like social media, it's under control for you? You have a healthy relationship with it?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely topical to talk about like health and well-being as it pertains to like our digital lives. But I think that's down to self-control, like in how you use it. I think if you kind of have a different conversation with yourself of like, what are you missing and what aren't you happy about, instead of blaming it on social media. It might be a little bit different, but at the same time, like, phones are totally addictive. That's a thing, and our lives revolve around it. So I think to answer your question a bit more direct is like, I don't really consume social in that way. Like I don't consciously follow people to follow up in their lives. Like I don't use Facebook really. I know Jonathan's going to fight me on that because I'll like his image once or twice. But yeah, I use it more for looking at things that I'm interested in than following people's lives. I think there's a little bit of connectivity in it. Like I'll lose contact with someone, which I don't like. So I keep that going. But in terms of my usage, like I try not to do that because it's just not healthy. Like I want to be responsible for my own health and well-being and happiness, and if there's something wrong with me yearning for something, then I should figure out why I don't have it and how to get it.
100%. I guess it's a mix of both, like a mix of being self-aware and understanding your ability and what you can handle, and just like restricting yourself from using it a little bit, and also just understanding what's good for you, I guess. But going back to Australia a little bit, university. I wanted to talk about, like, you went to university in Australia, or?
I did. Yeah. After London, I went back, and that's when I kind of started
studying. So
studying.
after high school, you went, so when you mentioned before and you said you left as soon as you can, that was after high school.
Yeah. Do you want
okay.
my like spiel origin story?
Yeah.
Which is I grew up in a small town. I wanted to get the fuck out of there. I saved up all my money from retail. I basically started working in retail when I was like 14 and thought that was going to be my career. I didn't do well in high school, and I saved up a couple of $1,000, got a plane ticket, moved to London, spent it all in 2 weeks, had a job in like 4 days, a house in 5 with like 20 other people, and just thought I was going to live there and work in retail. Like that's how kind of short-sighted I think I was when I was that age. But also like I was just year to year or like month to month like you are at that time. So I moved back because obviously, from that capture, my life was chaos and I was partying and hanging out with skateboarders and doing crazy things. And just ended up back in Australia pretty quickly after a few years. And that's kind of when I was like, okay, so I'm, 19, almost 20. I guess retail wasn't it. What do I do? It's like, I guess I study. So that's
but I think
happened.
that's actually really cool that you had that experience, because I went straight into college and my first year was like somewhat of a flop, not for grades, but just like not knowing what my interest truly was. I just chose psychology, like throwing a dart at the board in a sense. And if you have like, I don't know if it was a gap year or a gap half year, whatever you had, it's at least
that conscious.
it wasn't conscious, but I think it was an experience that maybe led to you buckling down or knowing more of what you wanted, because you experienced maybe not failure, but certainly not success of like achieving what you wanted with retail.
I did run a retail store with 20 people in visual merchandise.
Tell me more about it.
A retail chain. But
Tell me more about it then. I don't know. Tell me more.
No, I sound like a jerk. But I think for me, I grew up in an unusual setting. Like I'm not your stock standard. My dad was an artist. We had no money. It was a single parent situation. And so I just, a lot of my drivers and what I've ended up doing is like growing up kind of living like that. Like, we lived in a tent, we did all these different things, and I didn't have the stock standard norm. Yeah, I did live in a tent.
Whoa. Tell me about living in a tent. That sounds so dope.
Well, my dad was a fine artist and he didn't want to do anything else, but we also lived in like a small bubble tourist town. So, like his art, he used to film pornos and like blow them up and like do vinyl billboards and stuff like that.
Whoa.
So he was like, I think my drive definitely to being creative, and, I grew up with art and music, and he was my biggest influence growing up, and his biggest influence was like the New York scene. So especially, kind of the pop art scene. And there was none of that where I was. So I kind of yeah, I guess I'm really rambling, but all it is to say is like, I feel like I grew up with all this influence of Americana and all of these things in a town that just like, culture was like non-existent. It was like surfing and skating. And like, I was always caught between all of them. And I just wanted to get out and do things. And I think that's the case for a lot of Australians actually. So when it came to studying, I just kind of fell on it, and I didn't feel those pressures because I didn't have that example of that parent. Like my dad wanted me to do well because he didn't do well, and he was like, "I'm a bum." I was a bum, and he's super smart, by the way. I shouldn't say this in case he listens, but like he's like, he was like, he's an amazing writer. He writes poetry. He's fantastic, but like, he, he partied and he was in the art scene and he didn't get to do university. So there was a little bit of that pressure, but I also didn't have any of those like traditional families around me, or I didn't go to private school. I went to public school. So everyone was kind of winging it. And I think that is what I didn't like have the same pressure. It's very different in America.
I'm just, there's such an allure to, I don't know the exact situation and whether it was like for better or for worse, but, kind of going off the grid, living in a tent or like, by the beach, or just experiencing life more for the now rather than, working for some corporation and doing things to better yourself for the future, but enjoying the present. And I don't know, I'm just so fascinated by that lifestyle. What were his inspirations to become an artist? Like he said, it was a lot of from New York. Did he live in New York, or was
he'd never traveled overseas until
really?
I was like, I think 14.
Whoa.
But yeah, I mean, he's born in the 50s and he comes from traditional English parents. And he like Brisbane was actually a pretty buck wild place for both my parents. My mom was a dancer and he was an artist, and that's how they met. It's very romantic. But
yeah, I bet there's some crazy stories that came out of that town, that city.
Yeah, but like there was obviously a lot of hard stuff, like drugs and alcohol were a big thing in the 90s. Like it was kind of the aftermath of that. So, I'm not going to get into the sad stories, but like I think also as much as it inspired me to do creative work, I ended up wanting to be more professional, I think, because we had no money and because my dad kind of was unfulfilled in some aspects. Like, he had a kid, so he had to move to Noosa and he took care of me, and he was outside of the art scene that he loved. And anyway, we're going into a very personal story, but like, I just think that it's all relative, and we have a way of fantasizing about, like you were saying, the grass is greener, but there's two sides to every coin, and I think you gotta just go with your intuition, and I think that's what I did, and that's how I ended up studying.
So what drew you to retail? What did you like? Was it like working at? Tell me about what you did for retail, because that's such a broad term. So I want to know more about that.
I mean, at 14, I was a shop assistant.
Sure.
I was like hanging swimmer on a hanger.
Okay. No, but like you thought that was your future. So like you must have had a bigger dream. So what drew you to that?
Yeah.
To retail in general? What were your aspirations? And like I said, I want to hear about London a little bit in that time, actually.
Yeah. In Australia, retail is very different. So I guess I'm always like polarizing like between Australia and America in a different place, because that's like where my brain is, like half and half. But my younger self was retail, because that was as close as you got to like fashion and shoots and things that we do. But growing up in Noosa, there was no one doing that stuff. So you're looking at magazines. Back then, I didn't even barely use the internet. So, I was reading magazines. I loved that world. I loved editorial, and that seemed the closest gateway. And also in Australia, it does actually end up becoming a bit of a career, because you get paid well. So there's minimum wage. You get $22 an hour, even if you hang swimmer on a hanger. So
sounds like you were more forward thinking than you realized.
Yeah.
Because
I was a hustler for sure.
Because I mean, like it does. Like when you say retail, I imagine like Target and working
Yeah.
at the cash register, or maybe the grander thing would be to own your own Target. Like for you, it seems like retail was just the gateway to getting into fashion photography and the creative industry, because you just saw like there wasn't much of an entry other than retail. If that's right, if I'm getting it right.
Yeah, 100%.
Okay.
So I think I started working it was a streetwear store. That was when streetwear was like actually in the 90s when it was cool. I think it's having a resurgence now, but that's what I loved. And that was the closest I could get to culture too. Like, a lot of these streetwear brands were covering music artists and different people doing creative work. And I think that was a draw for sure. And it was the only job in my town basically that wasn't waitressing or working for your parents.
Yeah.
So I worked at the one, I want to do bunny ears and say cool retail store. It was called Youth Culture.
Sick. Youth Culture.
It's now all maxi dresses and high heels. So it's a very different store. But at the time it was like selling like Girl Star and Puma and all of those brands. And to your point of elevating it out of just my personal story, it's like, that's how I ended up working with brands. Like brands were the closest thing that I could like, it just seemed cool then. Like they were doing content that I liked. They were doing shoots that I liked, and they were working with artists that I liked. So that's, I think, definitely where the brand love came into play as well.
Yeah, I think I like working in the creative industry. I'm having like mixed feelings today recently about brands and why I want to work for them. But for sure, a big reason why I got into video production and that kind of industry was brands. I thought brands were so cool, and I still do. And the idea of working for them and like kind of creating something unique for a brand like Nike, Adidas, whatever. What were some of the brands that you liked when you were growing up, like that you aspired to?
I mean, I think high fashion was the most obvious then, because I was looking at photography and I didn't know it at the time. But yeah, when I came back and from London and started studying photography, like London really is what opened my eyes to the people that worked behind the magazines, you know?
All right, yeah. So let's get into London for
and
sure.
stuff like that. So I moved to London and I worked in a retail store, but that was my first experience of living in a major city. So there were kids in that retail store that were like skateboarding and doing art on the side. Like we went to art shows all the time. Like my friend was at Chelsea College and like other friends were studying fashion. So that's really where I started to get exposed to people doing different careers. And it was really exciting and really cool.
Yeah, but before even getting there, what was the decision like to just buy a plane ticket? Did you know people in London? Did you just say like, let's go? Or what was the process like?
I'm really lucky that, I had a single parent and not much family, but my friends that I've built around me throughout my life, I've felt really blessed to kind of be aligned in doing the same thing. So I actually was supposed to move to Melbourne, and then two of my friends were like, actually, we're moving to the UK. And it was as simple as that. I was like, shit, yeah, I want to do that. I'm going to do it. And so
Hell yeah.
I bought the ticket and moved with them. And yeah, I did have friends from Noosa, and they have all had amazing careers from doing that move as well. So yeah, that was kind of the impetus. And then I didn't really have a plan. So I figured it out when I got there.
Interesting. Yeah, for me, when I moved to Shanghai, it was like I had a friend working at the same company that was hired to move out there and work for. So that was huge. And I think I've been thinking about that recently. Like if I ever was to leave Shanghai, it'd be super important for me to know people in the next city I moved to or wherever I moved to, because that can help you out so much, having just like somewhat of a foundation or an anchor to who's around you. So when you got to London, you said you didn't have a plan, but you did end up working for a store?
Yeah, I worked, also a really cool name. It was called Hijinks. But funnily enough, it was the company owned this skate store called Skate of Mine. So, like right around before Palace existed, there was like Skater Mine and one other skate store, and skating was there wasn't a lot of skate retail there at the time. So that's kind of how I got into the skate community there. And then, but Hijinks was streetwear again, and they had a fleet of like, I want to say 6 or more stores in London alone.
Wow.
And so it was like a multi-level retail streetwear store that I worked for.
Sweet. And the apartment life, you said you lived with like 20 people.
Oh
Was
my
that
God,
exaggerated or?
I wish I had photos. Like it was the time when you didn't have like, we didn't have phones that took photos, and like I don't. Oh God, I wish I had more photos. But it was tragic. It was like I lived in 2 different places like this. So basically, when I got there, like friend's older brother was like, "Oh yeah, you can't rent a place because you're like a child, and 2, you have no money, and 3, like you are not from here." So live in this illegal housing situation, which was basically people would rent rooms, like individual rooms in big mansions out. So you would pay as a person to live in a room, and I lived in a room with 3 other girls. Oh my God, this is sounding like a classic like Flight of the Conchords Australian episode, but it was we paid like £50 I think a week to live there, and it was month to month, and it was like had a shower in the cupboard, and like you're living with South Africans and Romanians and like people from all over. And
sounds like a hostel pretty much, just like illegal hostel.
Illegal and like the shittiest hostel you've ever seen.
Wow.
Like just tragic. But I think we pushed 3 mattresses together, and like we barely had sheets. So we were really pretty rugged.
Do you still talk to anyone that you used to live with?
Yeah, well, some of them were my high school friends.
Right. You still stay in touch with even them?
Yeah, yeah, I do. Like I said, like my core group of friends were like they're my rocks, and one of them's here actually. One of them, Mariki, and I have known each other for since I was 13, technically 6, but we weren't friends in primary school, so rivalry.
Wow. Wow, London sounds amazing. So when we went into this podcast, I was thinking it was going to be a decision. Well, I guess it still will be. So after London, you decide, how long was it that you stayed there for? You guys roughly, like.
Yeah, it was, I reckon 18 months.
Oh,
almost 2 years.
Longer than you made it at the beginning of this. You made it out to be like it was like 2 weeks or something.
I mean, it feels like a blur. Like, I think I went back there and talked to one skateboarder. He's like, "I thought you'd be dead by now." And I was like, "I am a professional with a LinkedIn profile. Thank you very much." But I moved to Canada. I did a short stint in Canada and went back to London, and then ended up back in Noosa.
So before going back for school, you ended up in Canada for a little bit?
Yeah.
Where in Canada?
It was supposed to be Whistler, but we got evicted. I feel like these are terrible stories, and then I ended up living in.
I love them. I don't care. I don't care what the audience thinks. I'm loving these stories.
I ended up living in Vancouver in this super cool apartment. It was like right on the bay near David Street. All I remember is like there was a ton of sushi, and we lived in like the Chinatown and just had this sick apartment.
I hear amazing things about Vancouver, actually.
I got to go back. You know what? I haven't been back since then. So it's like this time capsule in my brain where I just remember it. But yeah, I didn't know what I was doing, basically, is the short of the story. And I went back to London and then was like, okay, it's probably time I got my shit together and moved home. Okay.
So we're getting our shit together. We're back in Australia. We go to a school.
Yeah.
What do you decide to do for school? Like, what is your idea? Like, I'm going to be, like, what major? Like, what did you decide to do for that?
Yeah. I basically started taking, that's around the end of my time in London is when I really started taking photos. And I had a friend, his dad was like the only photographer I knew in our town. And I spent a lot of time smoking rolled up cigarettes with him and drinking beers and talking about, photography. And that's kind of where it started. And so my dad gave me his film camera, and I found this school that I liked. And at that time I was like, I only want something that's a year. Like I can't commit to longer than a year, and I want to just be able to learn about photo. And so I shot a portfolio in Noosa with my friends. Sorry, I'm just laughing because it sounds like a Vice story or something. There's like friends vomiting and I made it like artistic and like stuff like that. And I got into photo school. So
That sounds like the classic getting into photo school story.
Yeah. I did my portfolio in like plexiglass and like everyone else had books and I had this like half art, half photo portfolio. And yeah, it was a private photo college and I packed up my station wagon and Mariki moved back from London and we hit the road and drove to Melbourne to go to school.
Okay, so you ended up in Melbourne for school.
Yeah.
Okay, sweet. Melbourne is probably the best place for an art school in Australia, right?
It for sure. I think
A lot of my guests don't know much about Australia. So Melbourne, like explain to
Sydney has amazing colleges as well. I think Melbourne is known for an amazing food and art scene and music scene for sure.
Right. Just more what I was getting at is more of the scene of the city rather than the specific college itself.
Yeah.
For me, when I visited Melbourne, I was very surprised with just like, the graffiti and the art scene and, they're known for the coffee and like all that stuff. Like it was a very youthful, fun place to be.
Yeah. It was the only city in Australia that felt like an option for me for sure when I came back. So yeah, and the college that I found, I chose because they were doing fine art photography and they still had dark rooms. And, I think a part of what drew me to photography at that time wasn't just like shooting an image, it was also the process. So for me, I really wanted to do darkroom work and be experimental more than just shooting documentary or fashion photography. So that's kind of why I chose that school and it seemed like the best one. And yeah, and then I quit after a year. So
Well, I mean, that's a big reason why I started this podcast. I mean, the name of the show is called Observing the Process. And for me, like someone, I don't know how I came across it, but like for me, I realized, let's say you have a goal and the goal is to be, a fantastic photographer. But if you don't enjoy the process of getting there, then it's kind of like meaningless or in a sense. If you enjoy the process of, for example, like maybe a lot of people, it might not be your dream to be a carpenter, but if you enjoy even the mundane bits about it, it makes it way better than, maybe for me, if I was to be an accountant and every day I make a lot more money, but I hate every bit of it getting the money. You know what I mean?
Right.
So when you mentioned being a photographer and like you enjoyed the process of developing it and like the smaller things, that for me, that's what a big part of this podcast is about, is talking to people and learning about how they get to be successful in certain things. So that's cool that you mentioned that. But it's funny that like you realized it wasn't your thing eventually. Like you didn't eventually love it. So
I think it was less not my thing. I think I just realized it was a stepping stone to the next.
Okay.
And so, and to your point, the process, once you get into the process of something you don't know about, that then there might be like a thread that comes off of that and you start to go, well, what about this? And for me, the what about this was they knocked out all the dark rooms and started teaching me digital and they gave me my first laptop and I was like, whoa, digital. I've never done this before.
Yeah.
And then I got super into it. And then my friend was studying media communications and film and it kind of like, it was a Tetris. It just kind of slotted in. I was like, oh, cool. This seems like a segue to video. And once I started doing video and film, I was like, this is where I'm meant to be. This is what I love.
Sick.
So, those things are always inextricably linked between photography and film. I think it really helped me to start with imagery because learning the process of shooting a photo and then moving into motion, I don't know, visually it just like, it helped me think about things in a different way. I was thinking about, and at that time, honestly, we were shooting video on PD 170s and like mini DVs. So it wasn't pretty. It was ugly.
Yeah.
So I kind of came at it, which is, I think I was just lucky that's where the industry was going. It was changing much more to, what is the visual against the story you're trying to tell. And I think photography helped me like marry those two down the line.
What time, like what year was this in school?
Always get caught on this. I think it was 2004.
Okay. Because it's just in terms of the transition from, analog to digital, that's pretty crazy that you were in the midst of that. Like I had this dude, Rodney Evans, who owned Central Studios, and he was a true professional at that time, like already was in his career while that transition was happening. So for you to kind of be in school while it's happening is an interesting thing. Like to just kind of find yourself at that time and realize, okay, so photo's not really working out, but video was the move for you.
Yeah, it was absolutely just loved it from the start. Like I did media communications, which at that time was more broad. So we did cover digital as well and learn how to build websites and like podcasts at that time were like RSS feeds.
Yeah, that's pretty wild.
And I think Vimeo launched in 2004 and YouTube in 2005. I might be wrong.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
But
about right, yeah.
Yeah, I think about that a lot. I think once you get to a decade of working in a certain industry, you see a change. And right now I'm seeing that change. And, at that time we were making videos, but we were transitioning to like 5Ds. So it really was on the precipice. We were the generation that I feel like came in using that stuff professionally and made a career of it. And now we're in the next generation, which I think is even more interesting to me, is like, how are they subverting that and how are we like making something different? And I think that's super exciting because it was pretty restrictive back then. I shot my final year film with like a Red Rock to get a still adapters on it because the 5D wasn't available yet. And it was heavy. Like as a woman trying to shoot something, I was like, I had Jonathan helping me hold the camera and I felt like a dick. Like I was like, I want to hold the camera. This is so annoying.
Yeah.
But no, that's the whole other story. But I feel it now. Like I feel it's interesting the difference between where we were then and where we are now.
Wow. Yeah. It's fascinating that you had like such a transition. And yeah, I just for me it was like I just got a Canon T3i as like one of the first cameras I got, and it was pretty simple to get in. Like, oh, there's these lenses. I have kind of YouTube tutorials and stuff like that. Back then, I don't think you didn't have the resources that you have now.
No,
nothing like that.
This is like you're reading courses on the internet and then being like, does that sound right?
Yeah.
Actually, I had a question for you. Why are you so fascinated in the studying part?
The studying part?
Yeah.
The studying
I've
part.
just noticed you ask everyone about like,
because I don't know what I want.
Yeah.
I don't know what I want yet.
Curious.
So I'm always curious to find out about like what other people are doing and learn about their road, and maybe I can learn something about it, and it will help me find out better what I want to do for the future.
Do you regret the study part? Is that why you ask about
the study part?
Education?
Me studying?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. That's an interesting. I mean, like, so I don't regret it because it led me to where I am now. But I just do feel like it's so expensive. Like I went to a private school. I didn't need to go to a private school. Ridiculous amount of money. And I could be where I am at now without having spent all that money. But at the same time, maybe I wouldn't have found out what I wanted to do, So it's kind of like a catch-22. You don't really know what's going to happen.
Yeah. I think I just noticed it was a thread in your podcast asking about education specifically. And I feel like for me, because I didn't grow up in America, which is completely different. Like, I don't think I would have been able to go to university if I had grown up in America. I wouldn't have had the freedom of choice because I didn't come from, or maybe my dad would have made different choices if we were here. So there's not the same pressure that there is to study. And then secondly, the government pays for it. So
oh, wow,
you're able to study. And
completely different.
Yeah, if I hadn't have had that choice, like, yeah, I might not have, but I'm so glad that I did. I met my network. I got the freedom to experiment like in a way that I haven't had since without the pressure, and really kind of get exposed to different ways of thinking and different people. the practicality of it, like, you know, I think that it's more the structure and the people that make the difference.
Mm.
Um, so I find it interesting when people have like a different story as well.
Yeah, I just feel like in America you're so pressured to go to school, and there's so much money on the line if you're going to like a private school. And so to hear people that, you know, they got, it just blows my mind that you wouldn't go to school if it was paid for. Like that just doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah. I think there's still the same parental advice of going to school and you should go to college because that's what you're supposed to do. Like society is still structured sort of the same, but it's not going to like change how your family lives basically, which I think is a big part of it. And I do think it sucks that people don't have access to education without that immense pressure, because the freedom that I felt with it is part of what I loved about it. And I think if I had a big debt that felt like I had to pay immediately and get into a corporate landscape, it would have really changed the way that I ended up working.
Yeah. It's just so different when you're not pressured to go in versus when you are pressured to go in. But getting back to, okay, so actually no, while I was still on university, do you think it's necessary for people to go to college, mostly for this creative industry? You know, like with all the resources we have online.
This being like video and
video,
and
mostly video and photography. You could take it like that. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I knew going into it, no, but like I think that, you know, like if you're clear on what you want, like you know that you want to be a director or you know that you want to be a photographer, it's a very practical thing. Like you can learn those skills more from getting on set and get there further and quicker. For me, I enjoyed the kind of analytical side and the research side and learning that I liked writing and learning how to communicate my ideas. And I don't know if I had gone straight into production, you know, like my background is in production and photography and video, but like I've since worked in a lot of agencies. So a lot of that is writing and communication.
Sure.
And as someone who didn't do that, you know, I did pretty good in high school, but you know, I had some life stuff going on and that really came through university where I learned how to be good at my job. And I think that gave me more options in the long run. So, you know, I now have the ability to pitch something or manage a business or manage clients and brands. And I don't think if I didn't go to university, I would have felt, one, the confidence, and two, like have the practical skills to do that.
So leaving university, you had what was the process like for that? You know, you're done with school in Melbourne, and did you go straight to LA or what was that?
So I actually started working for an online film festival. Like speaking of the transition, it was an online film festival because Vimeo wasn't really as big then, and especially not in Australia yet. So, but then it did start to happen when I got that full-time job while I was still doing my final year at uni, and so I was straddling the two. I've always kind of like worked a lot and done study as the other thing. But yeah, I decided that I wanted to move to America, but I stayed in that job just to round out like 2 years there because I was learning a lot about building websites, and we flipped it from a film festival to an agency and built an editorial platform. So
that's interesting. So you got this job while you were still in college?
I did.
Okay,
yeah.
Cool. And you were working there full-time or part-time during college and then after college full-time?
Yep.
Sick. So that's cool that like, so there wasn't a Vimeo or a YouTube, or it definitely wasn't what it is today then.
It was transitioning then.
Yeah.
So it was like becoming the platform that people use, but it wasn't a social network necessarily. And, you know, Vimeo was a portfolio for filmmakers then.
Right. So this company that you're working at, it's a film festival, online film festival. And you said you were there while they turned into an agency?
Yeah, I kind of helped them transition to
That's
that.
interesting.
It's a pretty small company.
That's cool. What was the name of the company? I'm just curious. Like
Portable Studios.
Portable Studios. Yeah. And so that's cool that like, yeah, I always find that interesting when, you know, because like you can have you can start something and you think it's going to be this amazing thing, and then it goes in a complete 180 and it turns out to be an even better thing. So like that was just cool. So tell me more about this. It was a film festival turned into agency.
Yeah, so they, Andrew Apostola and Simon Goodrich, started straight out of the same degree that I did. They basically got funding to make this online film festival because that was pre-Vimeo and YouTube. So, and it was quite reputable globally. And like it was definitely, I got an internship there, first of all. And so I was just like looking at film submissions from around the world and you know, some of the filmmakers, you know, my friend Warren Fu, who I later got connected with in LA, strangely, I met through that, and he submitted films, and a lot of the commercial directors that were up and coming at the time and now massive, they were submitting films, and so I first went through cataloging films, but then we were also making money off doing web development, and so I think they saw the opportunity and like, this isn't going to last forever. Like, how do we flip? And so, I kind of worked with them, and it was a pretty small company. So I was learning, they were learning, and we just transitioned. But they were really the ones that identified, like, we need to find a way to make money because this funding's going to run out.
Yeah. So tell me again, what was the funding from the government or from the?
Some of it was government R&D and then grants. Yeah. In Australia, there's not the same corporate landscape. You know, here there's a lot of investment from private entities, and there it's really kind of government, either arts funding or research and development funding, just to see about different industries.
That's interesting because my friend, his name is Glenn. He works at Adidas in Shanghai, and he's from, I believe it's Sydney or somewhere in Australia. And a lot of the funding for the skate parks and like his experience, I think, in Australia is very different from his experience in China, because I think China is the epitome of, you know, corporate funding, like, you know, getting investment from that type of situation. But in Australia, it seems like he was very used to, you know, the government. Like, if there was something that you could make the case that'd be good for the community and good for everyone, like, okay, we'll fund this and we'll make it happen. Like, you know, skate parks for kids, keep them out of trouble. That's great. In China, it does not work like that at all to build a skate park or any public entity. So it was just different.
Yeah, there's good and bad things about it. Like, I think the good thing is that or at least when I was growing up, I'm not, you know, I've been away for a decade now, so I'm not as familiar with the current policies for arts funding, apart from a few articles. But, you know, there's restrictions of working with government. So, you know, it means that everything's a little bit more censored, not censored in the way of the way that we talk about censorship right now, but like, you know, it still has to be family safe. And so doing anything out of the norm, I mean, for a lot of filmmakers and other people, that's why we Australians go overseas, is because you can get funding for certain things, but not others. And then there's no other options.
Okay. So does that lead into your decision to eventually move to LA?
Yeah. So, I always knew that I'd study and then I moved back overseas.
Okay.
And because I'd done London, and at that time, you know, I was really honing in. I want to work in video. I like this hybrid of like agency and production, and I didn't know exactly what my role would be yet, but I knew that all my influences were from America. So New York was actually the original reason I moved here, and then I ended up in LA. So
you first went to New York?
I ended up in LA because I didn't want to move to New York in winter. So
that's the reason.
Legitimately.
Oh, New York's brutal in the winter. I don't blame you. Yeah.
We got on a flight on Christmas Day from Australia, me and my friend Mariki, and we had a friend that had an apartment here in Echo Park. So I've always been in Echo Park since I lived in LA.
Wow.
And we had 2 single mattresses on a floor sharing a bedroom, and I hit the pavement looking for jobs. I thought I'll live here for a couple of months and see how it goes. And I ended up getting a job at these big photo studios where you went today, actually, Smashbox Studios. It was a different business then, but I got a job there, and I was like working amongst like celebrities and amazing catering that was free, and like the Kardashians would rock in, and it was like right immersed in the photo world of Hollywood and LA. And I was like, this is sick. So I stayed
Wow.
here for 6 months, but I was like, I came here to be in New York. I have to go to New York. So I moved after 6 months.
Okay, but during that 6 months, I was just there today with Jonathan, and he told me this is where Ashleigh had her first job. She was like, maybe food purchasing or something, or like the cart girl.
Okay.
I don't know what
Great.
he told me. He told me
Great.
like you're doing like, catering for the crew, or was that wrong? Or
No, I used to run. So the coffee bar is like a luxury service. Pretty much they did it at the time. They didn't make money off it, but you were basically like a hostess that like made coffee. And then I also my friend worked in the marketing department. So I would help them with like their marketing shoots, and they do production of, they would do photo exhibitions and different other things to market the studios themselves. So it was like my first little marketing soiree. And actually the people that I met there that work for Smashbox are still close friends, and the reason I got jobs after that. So
wow.
yeah, I'm going to the Philippines tomorrow for the creative director. She's getting married there.
Whoop.
So, and then my other friend is, I'm sure we'll get into it, the CXO at Imprint Projects, and she's the one that ended up getting me my job that I did for the last 6 years.
Wow. Okay. Before we get to that, you had a short stint in New York?
Not so short. I did a year and a half.
Oh, okay.
And then I did that bi-coastal thing. So I
going back and forth?
I was 50-50 for the first 4 years. And then after 4 years, I was like, no, you know what? LA's the place I want to be full time. And I kind of got sick of everyone asking me if I was like living here yet or how long am I here for. So I was like, I should just stay here full time.
So did you have was the job, you were able to go back and forth? Was it freelance? What were you doing in New York?
So my first 2 years in America was pretty rough, actually. Like it's not, it's interesting talking to you, I guess, as an American, but it's pretty rough here at the start because I kind of had this job where I was earning $50K a year. I was working with the owners, and I thought, I'll get the same pretty quickly, but not having any experience in here or having worked here in the professional industry, I kind of had to start at the bottom. So my first 2 years was a lot of figuring it out. And especially because I was moving between two cities, I was doing like, the Smashbox job, and I do freelance a little bit. But it was really when my friend Nina moved out to New York and was staying in my room and found a job on Craigslist for Imprint Projects, which is the creative agency she ended up working for. And then like I ended up working with her for the last 6 years. So
okay. So Imprint, this is like now the foundation of your career.
In America, yeah. I did freelance for some other like companies, Protein Agency, which is a really great company based out of the UK that does a lot of content. I would shoot online videos and do that on the side and then produce events for them. But Imprint is really where I found like, okay, these people speak my language and this is where I want to be.
So you found them in New York, actually?
Yeah.
Oh, so do they have offices in both New York and in LA, or?
Yeah, so David had the bookstore here, and Adam Katz was living in New York because his wife's from New York. And so I originally started working with the New York office. And then when I wanted to be more based out here, they graciously made a role for me out here and let me move out here.
Nice. So what exactly was your role? Because I'm just curious, and maybe so my audience knows a little bit more about like what you were doing at Imprint and yeah.
So Imprint Projects has always been pretty aware of who they are. They were at the time a small cultural agency, and they specialized in content and experiences. So they were kind of that new frontier of marketing of like, we're the experts in culture, we're really good at design, we're really good at content, and we believe in like programming and events is important for marketing for brands. And now that's everywhere, right? There's like director of experiential at most brands and that kind of thing. But at the time, it really wasn't as big. But Adam had a really clear vision for it. And David is just like such a cultural nerd. And then Nina was really the brains and business behind it. And so I started creative producing with them and running their programs with Levi's. And so I did like a traveling arts festival and content shoots and campaigns. And then I really grew up with them. So I went from creative producing to executive producing, and then I kind of built their LA office. and ran that for the last couple of years. And it went from 4 people, and I've just recently left at 6 years, and it was up to about 50. So
Wow.
yeah, it really saw the growth and change.
Right. Okay. Because I didn't realize you were at this company kind of from was it the birth, you would say, like from the beginning, or?
I definitely went to one of their first events, but yeah, it was the beginning. It was really when it was getting established. Nina and Adam had a really strong business relationship, and David and I really related creatively. And so I worked a lot with David Kramer out here, building the LA creative team and offices and stuff like that. And yeah, it was definitely interesting to see a business go from small to medium. Like that's not large in America. That's like a medium-sized company, but
Yeah.
for sure it was I saw it become an adult.
Wow. Yeah. That's just like pretty interesting to start at a company, and then, you've been there for 6 years and seen it grow to so much, and to tie it all together, you said the family books, we were talking about this at the beginning. One of the guys, he also owns the bookstore, or is that not?
Yeah, now David and it was founded by David and a couple of other partners, and Adam actually ended up becoming part of the business. So Adam and David run Family Books independently. It's independent of Imprint, but in terms of the DNA of Imprint, it was always working with artists, and yeah, that was David's other business.
So are there any like highlights of working with this company, brands that you specifically like to work with, any projects, any travel stories, or just reminiscing back on the days of Imprint?
God, it wasn't that long ago, so I
But it's been 6 years since the beginning,
no,
right?
but
you just left, like it's all kind of fresh, right?
Yeah, no, for sure. I feel now, I'm 13 years into when I started studying photography and knowing that this was the world I wanted to be in, and I know now that like my career has been built on working in small agencies and helping them grow and helping projects change. So Imprint's definitely like the best case study of that. And, I think they reeled me in with doing this project with Doug Aitken and Levi's. And they're like, you're going to be traveling across the country with a bunch of artists for 30 days to every city in America and like doing these arts festivals. And I did that project, and it was like, by far the most amazing thing. Like coming from Australia and all the stuff we talked about, I was just like, it was mind blowing that someone would pay me to have this much fun. And I was just like, and be around, like I met Patti Smith, and like Doug Aiken's like this incredible artist. And then Levi's was a brand I really respected and later worked with year over year and still love them as a brand. And, that was the hook. And then, yeah, from there, I just kind of built upon the scale of projects that I hadn't done before. And I think, but that was by far the craziest project. We were in a Sprinter van and we were following a train along the country and like setting up these insanely hard yurts at every stop in train stations. And it was music performances, like whip crackers, dances, film. It was amazing.
Yeah. It does sound amazing to me. Like I've had these experiences with some brands, like with Adidas. I when I was working at Push, I got to do something that I never thought I would do, and it in retrospect, it is an amazing experience, and I look at it fondly. But then, more into the future, I kind of realize I don't know if this is exactly what I love and how fulfilling it is to me to do. So I'm just curious, like, what is it about working in, with brands and in this type of agency culture that like keeps you wanting to work in this agency culture? Because for me, I'm almost at a crossroads. I'm not sure exactly if I want to continue to do these kind of projects. And because I just feel like they are good in retrospectively, but then when you think about it in the moment, did I really love every bit of it? That's just my personal feeling.
Did you love the process?
That's what I'm talking about. I'm trying to figure out, did I love the process? That is a key thing that I'm talking about.
Yeah.
I just think it's interesting to look at it from that perspective. But anyways.
Yeah, no, I hear what you're saying. I think I've been lucky in that it's always been about working with people that challenge me. And I think the small agency landscape compared to like the Shy It days and the 72 and Sunnies is very different, the type of work that you're doing. So I thoroughly believe in like working, like joining brands with communities, and that's such a loaded statement these days, but like if we can use that money basically to fund art projects and fund people doing good work, and that makes sense for the brand, like that was what Imprint was really good at, and that's kind of why I stayed. From a more philosophical, like existential level, do I believe in brands today? I think we're in a tumultuous time to like where I was when I was 17 and I loved a brand. Like they're really big and they destroy the planet and there's mass production and there's a lot of bad things about it. But like you could say that by a lot of industry standards. So
right.
I think if we can find a way, I think brands have always supported culture and that's what's exciting to me. And I feel like if they keep leaning into that and become more, environmentally and socially responsible, then there's still good work to be done,
Yeah, totally. I just think like I have like some of a pessimistic mindset recently in that these things wouldn't be happening unless there was a profit motive, like
that's the same for any industry ever.
right. And that's where this conversation eventually leads to is it's any industry, right?
Yeah, I think we're in a really tricky time for brands because I think brands and the population has grown, the demand has grown, and inherently that's changed production models, that's changed consumer models, and that's really challenging. And, there's a lot of stuff that I definitely don't believe in that. But when I look at the other entities that, have power and money, you're kind of weighing the lesser evils in a lot of ways.
Right.
And so what can you do to change it? And I think more smart people that are consciously minded in what they do and what they create, if they don't get into these industries, then we're going to have the same oil and water and nothing's going to change. So I do think that, but it depends on who you are and depends on what your role is. Like, do I think that am I like die hard for brands and marketing? Absolutely not. Like I'm in this specific subset of drilled down of like, I've learned that my creative skills of making video or coming up with like ways to marry brand money with people that I know are good, doing good work, and trying to fund that. And that can be like a DP that I really like. Like you're a DP, you love being a DP. I want to get you paid because I really like you as a person. So like I'm gonna be the person that goes to the brand, deals with all the stuff that most production people hate, which is like, oh, I hate clients, I hate this, I hate that. And I'm like, I can be that person because that's just a human that had a different life path to you, and they still maybe even have the same interests as you. So if I can be that gateway, and that's all an agency is, right? Like you're the person dealing with finding the people that will do the job. So if I can be that person that gets my friends paid, then I'm pretty stoked on that. Like, is it a career that I might be in 30 years? I don't know yet. And I think I'm very much in a transition of that.
I think you just fully probably answered my next question, but just the term middleman. What do you, how do you
middle woman, you.
Sorry, middle woman. How do you
or just genderless, middle person.
The middle person. What do you feel about the term middle person? And like, especially in this industry right now, because I struggle with it in terms, like, I feel like
Why do you struggle with it?
Why? Because I feel like I'm useless. I feel like I'm not doing much of anything. I feel like if I was to be in your role, like, because I've done similar things, I'm connecting with the DP, with the company, and like kind of just filling the pieces. And I think that's a lot to do with me and my own personal problems about dealing with my own self-worth and in the broader spectrum of business and how I can accomplish something. But I'm just curious what you feel, because maybe you could help me make me feel better about myself. I don't know.
I don't want to be responsible for figuring out your emotional problems right now on this podcast, but sure. I think we all go through, I think it's what I always say is it's a tough industry because it's driven by people and ideas. And I think sometimes we don't talk enough about being lucky to be paid for that
Mhm.
to just come up with ideas and
Yeah.
work with your friends. And that was the original draw, I feel like, for advertising. And then it became really douchey, and it is. But yeah, I don't know. I think you have to find what works for you. There isn't an answer in the industry necessarily. Like,
Hmm.
I think your the way that you look at the process and what you said about like, do you like what you do every day is super important. Like,
Yeah.
if you don't like sending emails every day or dealing with clients, then no, you shouldn't do it.
Hmm.
Is it as big as like trying to bring down the industry because brands like are destroying the world? Maybe, but that's a whole different job, you know? So I think you got to start with yourself and what you like doing every day. And because I definitely, as someone who's worked in agencies for a long time, there's a lot of people that think it's really cool
Hmm.
and then get to doing the work and they hate it. And
Yeah.
that's totally fine. And it makes a ton of sense. It's a really frustrating job. Like,
Hmm.
to break it down, the process is it's a lot of emails, it's a lot of writing, it's a lot of dealing with conflict resolution between people because they don't like each other or they don't like each other's ideas or they're not articulating like criticism of the work well. So there's definitely a lot of challenges in the day to day.
Hmm.
But for me, I always found satisfaction in the team aspect and the building the business. So
Hmm.
to have an independent business and to try and do something different and to put yourself out there and really work with like a small group of people to build something and then to get ideas paid for and work with good people, like I guess where I came from, I'm like, I can't believe you get paid to do that. Like,
Yeah.
that's amazing. But I definitely go through the same conflicts of working with brands and
Yeah.
working in agencies, which you know, there's really shitty parts of it too.
Hmm. Cool. Thank you. Thank you for your opinion. I appreciate it. Social media. I was curious, when did you start using social media? What are your first impressions of it? Like for me, it was MySpace. What about you?
My first social media was also MySpace. My
Hmm.
name was Jurassic Parker.
Jurassic Parker. I like it. That's pretty awesome.
Yeah. Like that was around the time that we talked about where I was very analog and then like someone was like, you got to get a MySpace, you got to get online. And so, yeah, my transition to digital and social was definitely, what's the word? I don't know. I was timid with it for sure. I didn't know if it's something that I wanted to do. And
Hmm.
I think unlike kids today, I didn't grow up putting photos of myself up everywhere. So I was really self-conscious about that. I think up until I don't know how many years ago, I didn't even have photos of myself up. I didn't like it.
Wow.
You know, so,
That's different. Yeah, that's definitely
yeah,
different.
it's very different.
Yeah.
But once I got into digital and especially making videos, you know, videos now where my head's at is actually not so much in video, but it's how do you like make a creative idea that translates real life to digital. Like, how do you communicate something and like what format can it be? And I think that the most exciting thing about video right now is like we need to not just do beautiful documentaries with flair on the lens. Like, I think that's bullshit. Like,
Okay.
social to me opens up a new way of making imagery and stories like out of videos or photos or even like coding that can get people to absorb information in a different way. And I think that's really cool. And I think social's like only on the precipice of doing that. So I see it from a visual perspective and a connecting perspective of like how people are like getting excited about someone's ideas.
Yeah, this may sound kind of cheesy, but I was listening to, Gary V. Have you ever heard of Gary V? Gary Vaynerchuk he's kind of like a loudmouth on social media, like a hype man in a sense, but he does know what he was talking about. It. And it's just cool to think, like, he just brought to my attention, like, someone asked him in an interview, like, what would you do if you were Nintendo right now? Like, how would you deal with it? And he was like, I would make every single Nintendo character have their own social media account and then be able to just create content based off Super Mario, Sonic the Hedgehog. Sonic's not Nintendo. But anyways, I was just interesting to see there's so many different avenues and ways you can use social media. What was your experience while in the past 6 years with Imprint using social media? Was your job to use their account at all, or was it more it for brands mostly?
So the transition that's happened between, like, in terms of services for agencies, like especially in the small agency world, is where we were started producing campaigns that were primarily like on YouTube or print or
Mm,
lookbooks. We started moving to social. So we used to run and strategize and do the creative and production for brand social accounts. So we did Google, Google Play, we did Sonos. We've done different Levi's collections like Levi's Skateboarding and Levi's Made and Crafted.
mm,
So we would come up with the strategy behind the content that they made and then actually do the posting and creation and copywriting for all of that.
mm. Something that think about, and when I was working heavily in it, was just the amount of money that goes into advertising. Do you think people that aren't in this industry have an idea of how much money goes into it? Do you feel like it's an outrageous amount of money, or do you think it's like what it should be?
I mean, no, I don't think it's what it should be. I would love to see that money go to other things,
Mm,
basically. But
mm,
I am still in a world where I'm not working in the above the line like campaign insane amounts, but
mm,
I do um I'm not shocked by it because of how
mm,
much companies make and how much they need to spend and where
mm,
marketing is, especially in the US. Um but I do think that there could be a better use of that money for sure.
mm. Yeah, for me, it wasn't really about like what's the better use. It was just interesting to me to see sometimes like the amount of budget that goes into certain projects. Um,
When I say better use, to be clear, I
mm.
mean not shooting videos that don't mean anything. I mean, if you were
Oh,
able to take that $1 million that they spend every year on creating useless videos
hmm,
and fund a program, or like what we did with Levi's skateboarding, like build a skate park that someone
mm,
gets to use in Bolivia every day.
right.
Like those are the kind of programs that still keeps me excited about brands. And when I say brands should be spending their money in a different way, I think the advertising model is definitely dead. And I think um, the money that is spent on things that are consumed for like 15 seconds should be used in a completely different way. And I look forward to brands being more receptive to that.
That's exactly what I'm talking about. When you hear like I maybe I can't remember the exact amount, but for example, like the Super Bowl is a prime example of a 30-second ad slot that might cost upwards of like a couple $1 million. I don't know what it is, but it's just like that money is almost evaporated just for people just to like see for 30 seconds and then it's gone. And it's like, and when you bring up these examples of, creating something that truly benefits people for potentially years, if not decades, like this skate park or community building, that does motivate me more to stay involved in the industry and work harder towards creating something that can benefit someone like physically rather than just like a chuckle for 30 seconds. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think that's where things are moving.
Mm,
I feel that the tricky thing about it, and social does play a role, is that there's a lot of different platforms that brands have to communicate on, and so the money is splintered. And I think where an outside partner like an agency or consultant can really help a brand is getting them out of their brand world,
mm,
because it still has to make sense. Like you can't be anarchist and market,
mm,
and like you need both.
yeah.
Like you need to do something that is still successful for the brand, because it still does matter. The hard thing to fight against for a broadcast spot is the exposure that you get to audiences all over America on a Super Bowl ad is something that's easily quantifiable in a spend. Like they can say
Mm,
there's millions of people that tuned in and saw this. And to be honest, millions of people will remember that ad.
mm,
But it's a flash in the pan moment. It's super competitive. Like I went through customs the other day and I can because I work in such a specific set of advertising, and I just say I work in advertising. The guy talked to me for 15 minutes about how much he hates the ads. I was like, I totally get it. It's like the door knocking of marketing. Like,
Yeah.
and brands still invest a lot of money into it. So I think that it's changing, but it's going to take another 10 years to see if people will really flip the switch on that.
Yeah. I within marketing and, advertisement development, I enjoy thinking about the possibilities of working with influencers. What do you think about working with influencers? Have you had the, I'm sure you've had the experience, but like the typical influencer is on Instagram right now or YouTube and has their own channel. What do you think about that? Have you had good experience or bad experience or anywhere in between?
It's less about the experience, and I think more the way that people are talking and thinking about it. I feel like brands have always worked with people of influence. I think
That's
the
true,
tricky
yeah.
thing that's hard now is that, again, it comes back to what they quantify. And right now, influence influence is equal to your numbers, and I don't think that that's right. And I've spent a lot of time trying to convince brands. It's the same logic, really. It's like, what is your audience or what is your consumer that you're trying to reach? And like, how can you do that more authentically and in a way that lasts? And I don't think working with someone that just has high numbers is necessarily going to make the best impression. So I see, the word influencers is loaded right now. It'll change. It's going to evolve. But working with people of influence that are doing good work and paying them to advertise on behalf of your brand, I think is super valuable. And I'd honestly rather see marketing dollars go towards paying someone who's doing that work every day to make something and tell their audience about it. And I think there has to be transparency about it. I don't think you need to hide it anymore. People are pretty savvy to brands. Kids don't care.
Yeah.
But I'd rather pay them to make a photo shoot or do a campaign than spend money on a Super Bowl ad, I guess.
Right. Speaking of kids, it seems like the new social media platform is TikTok. It seems like that's blowing up right now. And it doesn't, I mean, like I love Instagram and I feel that it's probably, I don't know I don't know, but it seems like one way or another, Instagram and Facebook are going to fall to the wayside eventually, just like MySpace fell aside and then Facebook came about. What are your thoughts on the future of social media? Right now, there's TikTok. Instagram is in the prime, if not fading. So what do you think about the future of social media?
I think people are pretty short-sighted with the future, and like honestly, I don't know what the future is, but if you break it down to what social media is, it's like a voting system, right? It's like an online democracy. It's
Sure, yeah.
it used to be that someone sets up the tools, like a platform, quote unquote,
Mm-hmm.
for you to make something. And then what was really beautiful about it is how everyone participates in that, changes that, likes something, and kind of grows a community from it. I think that's been decentralized by brands like Facebook, where everyone talks about this, so I don't need to talk about it. I'm sure you've read an article on algorithms and things like that. Like, we've lost the beauty of experimentation a bit.
Right.
So I think I don't know what's going to break that, but I do think I say digital because the internet is also a social tool, and I think that we need to create something outside of apps and mobile to really like make something different. But I don't know. I think it's interesting with TikTok that it's video and that kids are getting to create something. I think because of my background, like if I had a tool where I could have just made videos every day that was so savvy, I would have been stoked. And the creativity that comes out of those kids is amazing. The company itself and like how that works, some toxicity in it. I think
Right.
like
I completely, there's
you
a
know.
different conversation between the company itself and their motives and the actual
Yeah.
creativity that comes out of
Right. So I think when you're looking at it as just a tool,
Mm.
I think there's so much to be explored. Like, TikTok has become popular because you're marrying music drops with dancing and with cooking and like with comedy, and
it. It's so
think it's
strange
so
how it's so
cool.
specific to music. Like, I don't get it. Like, why does everyone just agree, like TikTok, like you have to have some foundation of music or interesting audio?
It was started as a company called Musically.
Right. Okay. So
So-
I half and half did know that because I actually used Musically for a second, and I couldn't believe there was some people with like 50 million followers who had like no idea who they were. And I think it was kind of a thing where if you were first on, first served, like you just got hooked up with a ton of followers just because you were on there from the beginning. I don't know if you know the history of Musically more than I do, but
Yeah, I do, and I'm not. I don't think I'm as well versed to talk about expertly about like what's trending and like what's cool, but I do come at it from like a social observation perspective, and I think the fact that people are building such weird and bizarre and amazing communities online, and that we still don't know how to like talk about that or harness that. Like, our generation is like, it's evil. I don't want to use my phone so much, but it's like, it's also really cool. Like you were alone when you were a kid, and and then there's kids that feel the pressure of that. So I'm personally super excited to see where it develops to. I think we're only at the beginning of like the democratization of it. Like I think people need to be able to change and vote for and like figure out like we used to what the platform should do. Right now I think it's turning into a corporate company where it's controlling our behaviors, and what used to be special about it is like our behaviors influence the program. And there's probably going to be people that would debate that and be like, Facebook listens to behaviors and data changes things and marketers look at data, but you need the data with human control. Like it can't just kind of be fed to you like a big brand. I think there's just so much room to play on the internet, and we haven't touched it yet, and we're only getting these big brands, but I think that will change. Like I'm really looking at digital artists a lot. Like that's where I consume most at the moment. So people that are using AR or creating virtual worlds or kind of getting pretty surreal with it, and I find that super interesting. I think it's even cinema 4D and the way that people are creating things that are totally alien but feel totally real, and you have
what's Cinema 4D?
It's like an animation software.
Okay.
But
So who are some people that you're following? And like, just, I'm actually out of the loop of Cinema 4D.
Oh God, again, I'm not the expert, disclosure, but like, one company in Australia that I was just super proud to see something like this online that came out of Australia, Pitch Studios. I think those kids are doing some really interesting things. I think Inez, I think her username's Inez Alpha on Instagram. She does some amazing work. I've been a super fan. There's some really cool people, and this is probably something to talk about, is that I think of their handles more than their artist names. So for all you out there, please use your actual artist name as your handle, because otherwise I get really confused.
What do you mean? Like you get confused by just who is who? Or?
I'm a visual person, so I always remember like someone's like handle, their Instagram handle over their name.
Oh, so you're trying to tell people to use their real name, or
Yeah,
Yeah,
with their
okay.
handle,
Okay.
if possible.
Right. That's interesting. Like my friend works in AR a little bit, and he was just at CES. I was seeing his story when he was there. There's so much cool stuff going on right now. Like even Sony built a car this year to try and like convey every aspect digitally that they can be within the car.
Yeah.
It's pretty wild to see what goes on at CES and all that stuff. But for the thing about AR and augmented reality and virtual reality, I don't use it much. It seems more experimental these days, What about you? Do you actually use any of that like conveniently, or is it more kind of like you have to go a little bit out of your way to use AR? Or do you know what I'm asking?
Conveniently, I mean, it's not integrated into our lives like social is. Like,
Yeah.
I don't think people understand digital fully. Like, I think, or technology. I think people often think of it as a tool, and unless that is integrated into something you understand, they get afraid of it. So no, I mean, face filters is like brands are like, oh, let's do a filter like Snapchat. You know, did the
I guess
filters.
that's a pretty simple form of augmented reality.
Yeah, that is AR.
Yeah,
That's like
it is.
Pokemon Go.
It fully is. Yeah.
That's like been the easiest, and I think that's why it's taken off, and brands understand that. But to fully invest in creating like an experience with it, I think people still have a hard time understanding it.
Yeah, I guess right now, like artists tend to use VR more than most people. I went to with Jonathan actually. We were in LA, and I think it was Bjork had a premiere of something she was doing, and basically you go through a couple different stages of the exhibition, and one of them you just sit in a swivel chair with the VR headset on, and you're just experiencing kind of different. I guess they were probably like 2-minute clips of just video, and you can just explore as music is playing. There's so much you can do with these things. It's pretty fascinating.
Yeah, I think the hard thing about VR is, I mean, that's been around actually since I started filmmaking. It's just that it's not as participatory, and I think there are ways that people are really changing that. But the thing I like about, you know, a mixed reality or creating a digital world that you're in, like it feels like SimCity or an avatar, is that you're actually able to like get involved and participate. And I think VR is a little harder in that sense. I think if you're doing gaming, it can be super exciting. I think in the world of like creating different landscapes and visuals and experiences, I think there's more exciting things on the precipice of coming out that will be different.
Interesting. So as we start to wrap up, I know you will be ending your LA chapter somewhat soon.
Yeah, I know. I'm still coming to terms with it, but I've left Imprint and we've decided to move to Shanghai.
Yeah, that's amazing. Are you looking forward to it? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm actually super excited about it. I feel like even doing this podcast, I think I mentioned to you before, like getting reflective and thinking about all the things I've done in the last 13 years. This feels like a completely new challenge for me. And I think meeting, you know, I met you out there, and I met a bunch of the friends and family of Push, and I really had no idea about what was happening there. And I think that started to change globally, and like there's a lot more attention on what's happening in Asia now. And I think it's going to be completely different for me, but like really exciting.
Yeah. What about the need to maybe speak Chinese? Are you taking any lessons, or what are your thoughts on just that aspect of the industry? You know, you're dealing with a whole new language in the mix.
I mean, that's one of the things I'm most pumped for. I did that 3-month stint, and when I was learning and living it, you know, that is actually what really changed when I was like, okay, I could live here. Because I think part of the challenge I had when I first went there was not being able to communicate with people, when I'm obviously someone who loves communicating with people.
Yeah.
I was like, how am I going to do this? You know, like it's a bummer. I want to hear what this person's telling me. And so, yeah, I know it's not going to be easy, but I'm really keen to continue the learning. I'm not doing it right now in LA, but I will when I get there.
Yeah.
And and I think also not just bringing like what I'm doing there, but actually learning from what people are doing there and what's relevant and what kids are into and what the creative scene is and how people are doing things differently is more what I'm interested in than how I can bring something from here. I think it'll be more of a learning for me myself.
Yeah, I was talking to Tim Cito on an episode maybe a month ago, and what I found out that was interesting from him is that the social media scene is actually quite segmented. Like even the North, the South, the West has different social media platforms than like it's segmented. And in America, it's pretty flat, Instagram, now TikTok, Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, whatever. Like everyone has a mixed verse of those. But what he was saying, and I didn't even know this, depending on where you go, you might have to be able to use different social media platforms when you're working with different brands and trying to get exposure. So I'm learning so much. If you're looking for a challenge, you're going to be in luck because it's a completely unique situation when you have to deal with Western brands and you have to, they only know about their social media and they have no idea that because in Shanghai or China rather, it's Douyin in China, and then TikTok is the Western version. So it's a lot. I think you're gonna do well. I'm super excited to see you out there. Yeah, thank you so much for doing this, Ashleigh.
Thank you. Hopefully there was some insightful sound bites in there. Who knows?
Yeah, it was great. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
All right, bye guys. Boom, that's it. Thank you so much for listening. If you found this podcast valuable, there are many ways you can support it. You can rate and review it on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you listen. You can share it with your friends, you can blog about it, or discuss it on your own podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, you can subscribe to this channel and like the video, or you can support it directly. You can do this by going to my website. I'll leave a link in the description. Thank you for supporting the show. Listeners like you make it possible. Also, if you enjoyed the intro and outro music, it was made by my brother, Danny Greenberg. You can go and check out his beats on Apple Music, Spotify, YouTube, or SoundCloud. He goes by the name Estoric, Estoric. All right, that's it for now.